It's time to get totally zen once again with iFi's Zen Can headphone amplifier, but will this lead us to a state of audio nirvana, or is it going to be more Nickelback? Yes, welcome back to the channel Audio Geeks. I promise I'll resist making any further Zen puns, as long as you promise just to hit those like and subscribe buttons below the video. Thanks again to iFi Audio for sending me out this review unit, but of course these are my own unfiltered opinions and I'm not being paid or otherwise sponsored by iFi. They'll be seeing this video for the first time along with you guys. So what is the Zen Can? Essentially it is a full throttle desktop headphone amplifier which iFi claims is capable of driving even the most power hungry headphones, such as the 600 ohm Biodynamic DT990s. Now I haven't got those at the moment, so I'm testing the Zen Can with two of my favourite cans. We have first of all the hifiman Sundaras, which you've all seen on this channel before, and these only have an impedance of 37 ohms, which is obviously quite low, but they're relatively insensitive or inefficient if you like, featuring a sensitivity of 94 decibels. And that means that they need a decent amount of current to drive their planar magnetic coils. I've also been using my even older and really trusty Sennheiser HD650s, which are much higher impedance headphones at 300 ohms, although believe it or not, they're actually a little bit easier to drive with a sensitivity of 103 decibels. On paper, the Zen Can seems to have plenty of power to drive both of these, as well as the 600 ohm Biodynamics. The balanced Pentacon headphone output can push up to 15 volts through 600 ohms, while the single-ended output provides 7.2 volts into 300 ohms. So certainly the numbers on paper support iFi's claims of extreme power. In terms of inputs, you've got a choice of three here. First up is the balanced 4.4mm input. There are of course also the standard RCA stereo inputs, along with a solitary single-ended input. Now this thing isn't really intended to be a preamp or anything like that, but if you do want to output from it, you have a single balanced 4.4mm output. I've mainly been using it with my Zen DAC V2, which I'll hook up in a minute, and I've mainly been using this 4.4 balanced interconnect, which iFi also very kindly supplied. The problem with it though is, believe it or not, it costs £70 here in the UK. I believe it's $79, something like that. Now I'm not a huge believer in hi-fi cables, I'll be honest with you, and I've also tried using it with iFi's much more reasonably priced standard RCA connector, and quite honestly I personally, through my gear and with my ears, couldn't tell much difference between the balanced input and the RCA input. Let's take a look at the front of the unit, and up front we have a power button of course, which is nice because the Zen DAC V2 doesn't have one. We've also got an input select to switch between the three inputs, but note that it isn't an instantaneous switch. You get a couple of seconds lag as the circuitry accommodates to the new input. And here you've got a gain switch, which allows you to increase the gain in 6 decibel increments. This allows you to more easily match the gain with the headphone that you're listening to. On the other side, in fact, of the rather nice and hefty but smooth volume pot, we've got the single-ended output, the 4.4 Pentacon balanced output, and this switch, which I call the trick switch, as it offers you access to both iFi's well-loved X-Bass mode, as well as the spatialization 3D function. Both of these effects are indeed conducted by analog means rather than digital signal processing, and we'll get how they sound in a minute. Okay, on to the music then, and this was being pumped out of my trusty M1 Mac Mini. There it is, look, using Rune 1.8, the latest version of software, and I was playing predominantly CD quality offline FLAC files from my own collection, ripped from my CDs, but also streaming high-res files from the likes of Qobuz and Tidal. The DAC duties were taken care of admirably by the Zen DAC V2, which we've had a look at before, and it was connected to the can via the aforementioned expensive 4.4mm balanced cable, which hi-fi also kindly provided for the purposes of review. As you know, the hi-fi Zen DAC V2 has already got a very pleasant headphone output, both single-ended and balanced in fact, and I managed to drive both of these cans no trouble when I tested the Zen DAC. So I was really curious to see if the Zen Can brought anything extra to the party, and although I couldn't conduct a blind test, I did volume match the outputs of both of these units and carefully A-B'd between them by swapping the headphones from the output of one to the other. The music selection was a usual mix of cooler than thou alt rock, pop, indie and electronica, along with the usual guilty pleasures. So featuring heavily at the moment, we have Billie Eilish's subdued but brilliant second album, Happier Than Ever, Wilco's Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, Depeche Mode's Violator, Ulrich Schnauz's classic Goodbye from 2007, and of course Metallica's Death Magnetic, not the rubbish CD version, but the much better digital streaming version. We also had Niels Fram's incomparably great 2013 album, Spaces. That's definitely the one to go and check out if you haven't heard it before. So after hours and hours of listening to all that stuff and more, what can I say about the Zen Can? Firstly, hi-fi were not kidding. This thing is seriously powerful. So after hours and hours of listening to all that music plus more, what can I say about the Zen Can? Firstly, hi-fi were not kidding. This is one seriously powerful desktop headphone amp. With a gain on the second lowest setting, they drive my Sundaras really easily with the volume not cranked up too far. There is the usual hi-fi channel imbalance at very low volumes, but it equalizes out very quickly. Background is very, very dark indeed, even during the really quiet, hushed portions of Billie Eilish's ruminations on the perils of teenage stardom. I would say this is a slightly warm-sounding amp, which I think makes it pair really well with the Sundaras, giving them a slightly less analytical, more rounded feel, only perhaps taking their treble precision down just a smidgen, not enough to reduce the air and sparkle at the top end though. The HD 650s on the other hand are renowned for their lush, realistic mid-range, and again the Zen Can paired very smoothly with them, really allowing them to stretch their legs on the likes of Wilco's album or Niels Fram's masterpiece. The overall effect is of a warm, slightly lush sound, but without sacrificing the timing and dynamics. Now, I wouldn't say that this is the most detailed or resolving headphone amp, and it certainly isn't treble forward. I would characterize the overall tonality of this amp as being slightly on the warm side of neutral, which I personally love. It makes for a lovely, relaxing, non-fatiguing listen, perhaps just lacking that finer element of attack and detail. The only time I would say it struggles is with really complex passages of music such as classical orchestral pieces, and there I think it does struggle a bit with instrument separation and clarity. However, that may also be due to the limitations of my headphones, which are no better than mid-fi. How about that all-important question, the difference in sound between the headphone output from the Zen Can versus the Zen DAC V2. As I suggested initially, I couldn't do a proper blind test, so my impressions may well be coloured by placebo. Take them therefore with a pinch of salt and apply the appropriate amount of audiophile skepticism. I certainly would if I was watching this review. Generally, the only absolute clear-cut difference is that there is a lot more power on tap. Even with the Zen DAC on high gain mode, I had to crank the pot a lot further round to get exactly the same sound level as from the Zen Can. Other than that, my impression was that the Can made a real difference to the bass predominantly, particularly when using the Sundaras. Even at the same volume levels, the bass felt a lot more textured and slightly fuller, and definitely slammed with more impact. I would also say that the soundstage felt a little bit deeper, if not wider, and imaging was a little bit clearer, and that was noticeable more through the HD 650s. The problem here though is that the headphone out from the Zen DAC V2 already sounds really good, and although the Zen Can does improve the power output significantly, the improvements to the inherent sound quality I think are a little bit more subtle and nuanced. Having used the Can now, I must admit I struggle to go back to using just the Zen DAC V2 on its own, whether that's psychological or not. However, if you're an audiophile on a budget and you can only afford one of these two units, then I would definitely advise you to go for the Zen DAC V2 on its own. It's a terrific sounding DAC. You'll get 80% of the total performance from the Zen DAC V2, with the remaining 20%, particularly with high impedance or low sensitivity headphones, coming from the Zen Can. Remember, if you have efficient non-high impedance cans, then you probably really won't notice that much difference between using either of these two units. So finally, before closing things out, how about the aforementioned trick switch, which allows you to apply either X space, 3D spatialization, or both? Well, the bass boost works very well, very similar in fact to the bass boost on the Zen DAC V2. It provides some welcome and quite natural organic bass uplift, which in my opinion works best if you're listening to music that perhaps de-emphasizes the bass in the recording, such as many classical and jazz recordings. However, if you hit it with something like Prodigy's Fat of the Land, it's all too much for this non-bass head audiophile. The 3D stuff I'm less impressed by. I can certainly do without it. It just widens a stereo image a little bit, but like all these technologies, I find that it dilutes from the impact of the original recording, but you may like it. I think these things do depend on individual taste. So overall, I would suggest that the Zen Can is a worthy audio upgrade for audiophiles with high impedance headphones who've got a little bit of cash to spare. And I'm happy to award it the Audio Fixation Bronze Award. Well done, iFi, on another great product. And yeah, I think the stack looks really attractive. But those are just my thoughts, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Stick around and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.